Hello again, another book about martial arts, and this time it's this book, Karate Masters by Jose M. Fraguas, and it's a collection of interviews with some very illustrious master instructors. Now, the thing about interviews, and we did a lot of them for Fighting Arts magazine, and I was always of the opinion, having read lots of interviews, that the weak point was usually the questions rather than the answers. You're not going to really get in-depth answers unless you ask the right questions. So that's one consideration. The other thing I found in Japan was when interviewing some of the Japanese masters, that there are some cultural and societal barriers to answering certain questions, and they get very uncomfortable if you ask them certain things, which to a Westerner would just be routine. And so that's something that has to be navigated. In the book, the list of the masters interviewed is a who's who. Takubota, Hirakatsu Kanazawa, Kane Mabuni, Humio Demura, Kenzo Mabuni, and Teruyuki Okazaki. Just a few of them. A couple of that I will mention in particular, just to zero in, is Master Higawano, and in it he explains some of the misconceptions about his background training with the man he considers to be his sensei, Anichi Miyagi. And for a long time this wasn't a name that was known, and he tries to clear up some of the erroneous information and the reasoning for that, and the lineage from Master Chojun Miyagi through Anichi Miyagi to himself, trying to pass on the authentic Okinawan Goju Ryo. So I found that very interesting. Another is a master who was among the first I ever saw when they toured England and came to Liverpool, was Taiji Kase, and he was the senior in the group, which included Kanazawa Sensei, Shirai Sensei, Noida Sensei, and I mentioned him before in a review, but he was an absolute powerhouse. One of the questions asked about him, it says, "You were one of the first JK instructors to spread the art around the world, and one of the pioneers in the famous instructors course. Is the JK instructors course as hard as it used to be?" And he goes on to say that at the time when that group of instructors I just mentioned were all involved in the instructor course, it was very, very hard. It's very severe training. At the time of the interview it wasn't as hard, but I'm sure it was still a very, very hard course. Another that I found very, very interesting was Henri Play. Now, Henri Play was the pioneer of karate in Europe, and he actually taught from various sources, pictures mainly, and came up with what he thought was Japanese karate. But in the book it mentions, one of the questions, it says, "Is it true that you met the great martial arts expert and historian Don F. Draeger?" And the answer, yes, it was around 1952, and he was the foremost world authority on the subject. Draeger visited my school at night and observed the training. He said, "Very interesting. What it is exactly, savate?" I said, "No, karate." He was somewhat surprised because he'd seen it practiced in Japan and it wasn't the same. Don sent Henri Play some films from Japan, and he was able then to see the authentic karate, and then he brought over a series of instructors over to France who really became the bedrock of the training. One of them was famous master Oshima, and had big influence. Henri Play wrote a book which at the time I considered one of the better books, Karate from Beginner to Black Belt. It really was a very good guide, and chock full of very, very interesting information from his own research. He had a shop, a martial arts shop in Paris, which was kind of a mecca. The second time I went to Paris, first time was just a trip with a girlfriend, and the second time was to the World Championships, 72, and I made a beeline for his shop, and it was a marvellous place. Had some really quite rare books, martial arts weapons. I remember buying a pair of nunchaku, they're very, very high quality, and I bought the book on Goju Kai by the Cat Master Yamaguchi, and I went back many, many times. He was the editor of probably the first martial arts magazine in Europe, Budo Illustrated, and copies of that were like hen's teeth, and we prized them. Even though it was in French, we tried to work out what it meant, and the pictures were great. So he really was a pioneer. As I say, the book has many, many other masters interviewed. The interviews are great, the questions are great. I don't really remember where I got the book. I think it was given to me, but it certainly has been a very, very good resource, and I recommend it.